Laughlin normally takes here. You could be sliding over to the other side of the aisle here. He always likes to be last. Is your microphone on?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts about Mr. McLaughlin, but I'm not on anybody's side.
It was tongue-in-cheek.
I know it was, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I thank you so much for that. Getting back to the basics, and I wouldn't have no problem sitting up here by myself because I've always been by myself. Always, and I'll remain so. Now, getting into the issues today, I'm only going to try to give you a quick synopsis in terms of, the position. And for all the board members up there, as always, this is nothing personal, okay? I'm only attesting to the facts as I know them. The proceeding for addressing the issue on public trust is, yes, challenging, and to some people overwhelming. But in my mind, it's well overdue. And I'm taken back by the fact that the legislature has to come over here and ask you to come up with some flow criteria for the protection of public trust. That's your job. I haven't been coming here as long as the 51-year-old person, the 51-year. I only have 37 years here. And I'm Patrick Porgans with Porgans and Association, and I am the de facto public trustee. That's who I am. Now, secondly, I agree, paraphrasing the Assemblyman's position, that the responsibility for protecting public trust are right here in this board. This is your job. The condition of the public trust resources are indicative of the fact that you have collectively failed across the board. Now, as far as these experts go, I have as much respect for experts as I do for attorneys. And that's not saying much at all. If the experts were correct in all the information and testimony that they would have provided heretofore, then the Delta would not be in the condition that it's in now. That is to say, if the science didn't become political science. And that's where my degree lies, political science. Now lastly, fourth, I remember collectively without the memory stick that the D-1641 proceedings, I can't remember if it was 11 or 13 years, it just went on and on and on. And we had some aborted decisions like, I think it was D-1630. I argued with this board, and I told you I took exception to the base flow. Somebody came up with a 7 million acre base flow. That base flow was completely fabricated. And you people went along with that. And I told you, I came back and got your own staff to show you that number was overinflated. Now, there's a lot of people in this room that think they own the water. I heard a gentleman get up here and he said, somebody's going to take our water. I keep reminding these people, they don't own the water. They only have a permit to use it, or a license, or a contract. That's all they have. This board issues permits and licenses to them. Now we're talking about coming up with some sort of a non-binding, suggestive recommendation, and that's going to take another 9 months. I've got a Delta that's on the verge of a collapse. It's on an artificial life support system. And what I have here is a board that's going to sit up and come back and give us some information to the legislature. And let's say, by the grace of God, let's say by the grace of God, somehow, some way, we get over all of whatever it is that's been obstructing us to get to provide these objectives, flow narratives, whatever you want to call them. You are going to have to, after it gets through the legislature, we come back and fight it over again. You will have to enforce the law. And my God knows that you don't usually do that. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't here on Tuesday in time. You had already gone through 8 agenda items in less than 75 minutes. And I would have been here to tell you that I took total exception to extending or modifying that CDO on the Bureau and the Department. They've been getting away with violating the laws for decades. Now, I'm going to quote something out of D 1461. On December 19, 1999, the State Board adopted Decision 1641, which implements many of the objectives by conditioning existing water rights. D 1641 does not contain terms and conditions directly, specifically for the implementation of the narrative for the salmon objective. The objective may be achieved incidentally by ensuring the terms and conditions of D 1641 are met, by implementing of the non-flow measures outside of the State Board process. Wrong, wrong. The State Board found that a period during which there would be compliance with the numerical flow objective in the Bay Delta Plan, coupled with actions undertaken by other agencies and adequate monitoring of fish populations was necessary before it could determine whether additional implementation measures are necessary. My last comment. On page 6 of this notice that you put out, it states, in the first sentence and the second paragraph, since implementation of the current Delta outflow objectives D 1641, several species dependent on the Delta have experienced dramatic declines in populations, thus raising concerns about the adequacy of the current Delta outflow objectives and water quality and habitat conditions. I told you that would happen when those hearings were going on. I was the one that came back and showed exports in relationship to salmon declines. I came before this board and I appealed you to do something about it. You didn't. You've over-appropriated the waters of the state by almost 500%. Now the fish have to come back and compete with that group of predators out there in order to be able to get some water for themselves. My recommendation, Mr. Chairman, is that each and every one of you in good conscience examine your mind and your thoughts about the reality of the condition of the trust resources, and then take the required actions to protect them. And I pray for every one of you every night. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Porgans. Any comments? Any comments of the panel or comments in general?
Everything. In particular, let me add my own comments to some of the suggestions that we include inflows in our determination, in our process and proceedings. I agree with you that inflows is important, but I think for the purposes and the timeline that we have to meet, and the fact that we already have a San Joaquin proceeding underway, that the board needs to focus in this particular proceeding to outflows. Inflows are something that obviously will be considered, and obviously whatever happens in our San Joaquin proceeding will impact the Sacramento side, and obviously all that will feed into whatever future adjudicatory proceedings that this board may undertake. But I think for the purposes of what we need to do to meet our statutory obligation, and the time frame that we have, it is important that we have a very focused proceeding, and that focus should be on Delta outflow. I also agree that to the extent possible, we need to minimize the, I guess I don't want to call it testimony because it's not testimony, but the discussion that we will have in March in order to make that discussion as productive and as relevant as possible to provide us with information we need in order to deliver the product that we need to deliver. And I will agree with the chair, obviously, that this is a tremendous challenge, but it is also an opportunity for us to put forth, to gather the information, including information that we previously had, information that we don't have, and provide the board's best analysis, best thinking, best proposal as possible, given the constraints that we have. And it is an important step, and it is an important advancement in what we need to do in order to protect the Delta. I will share with you in conclusion just a statement of irony. You mentioned the work that was done in 1993. Well, thank you. I was actually a member of the board staff on the Bay Delta team that worked on the 1993 draft decision 1630. And I was disappointed, to say the least, when the then state board made the decision to not proceed in considering that draft decision. And my Bay Delta manager at the time was actually Tom Howard. And Tom told me very matter-of-factly, in the way that he does, that as an engineer, it was my job to provide my best technical work and recommendation to the board, but ultimately it was the board who made the decision, and that was the way it was. And that was actually a pivotal moment in my career. And 15, 17, 16 years later, here I am, and the matter is before the board again, and I'm both, I guess, dismayed that it is before the board again, but also exhilarated that we now have the opportunity, hopefully, to do the right thing, to finally, and I agree with Patrick that it has been too long and that we need to make some decisions. We need to go forward, and we need to do what needs to be done to protect the Delta. But we also need to do it with the right data, with the right scientific information. And it is going to be a challenge, but I certainly am committed to meeting that challenge, and I know that the rest of my colleague is as well. And I know that all of you are, and so I look forward to this upcoming proceeding.
Pardon me, could I just quickly point out that